Listen to me, my friend, because what I am about to tell you changed my life forever. My name is Raymond Miller. I'm 74 years old, and for 40 of those years, I was a cardiovascular surgeon in this beautiful city of Chicago. I thought I had seen everything in my profession. Broken hearts, lives saved, families destroyed by illness, but I never imagined my own son would break my heart in the cruelest way possible, on the very day we buried my Diane. It's 3 in the morning here in my house on Columbus Street, where I lived for 35 years with the love of my life. I'm lying in our bed. Well, now it's just my bed, and I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Diane's face in that white casket, surrounded by the flowers she loved so much. But most of all, I feel Charles's hand pushing me back when I tried to approach the front pew at Sacred Heart Church. "Dad, your suit is too old. It's not appropriate for the front. Sit in the back where the important colleagues won't see you." Those were his exact words, spoken with that fake smile he perfected during his years as a director. I just stood there, in my black suit that I bought 15 years ago for his cousin Ellen's wedding, feeling all the attendees looking at me. The same suit I wore when I operated on Governor Martinez in 2010, when I saved the life of the mayor's son in 2018, when I received the State Medical Merit Medal. But to my son, I was an embarrassment. If you're listening, my friend, tell me if you've ever felt the floor open up beneath your feet while you were standing still, because that's what I felt when Charles pushed me away from my own wife's casket. 45 years of marriage, and he wouldn't let me say goodbye properly when I wanted to speak during the service. When Father Hernandez offered me the chance to share a few words about Diane, Charles stood up, and he stopped me, in front of everyone. "No, Dad, your tears and sentimental stuff will just be embarrassing. Members of the State Medical Board are here." He said it just like that, as if my grief for the woman I had loved since I was 20 was something to be ashamed of. I sat in the 5th row, like a stranger at my own wife's funeral. I watched the back of my son's head in the front pew, next to his wife Patricia, greeting the private hospital directors with elegance, who had come more to network than to join us in our grief. And I was in the back, the old doctor who built the 3 most successful clinics in Illinois, shuffled off like some distant, problematic relative. But the worst part, my friend, what truly destroyed me that afternoon, was what I heard in the smoking lounge at the funeral home. I had stepped out into the garden for some fresh air. You know how that November chill feels in Chicago. When I heard familiar voices behind the rose bushes, Charles was there with Patricia, and with Dr. Morris, the director of Street Mary's clinic. Finally, the old man is free from being a nurse. He has no more excuses to interfere in the business decisions, Charles said to his wife, lighting one of those expensive cigars he smokes. "Now that Mom is gone, it will be easier to convince him to retire completely. The clinics will be completely ours in a few months." Patricia laughed, that high, pitched laugh of hers, and commented that they could finally remodel the main house in Lake Forest, which she said was far too old, fashioned for their current social position. Dr. Morris added something about expanding the business to the United States, something I had always refused to do, because it would mean abandoning the low-income patients we serve at our clinics. I just stood there, hidden behind the bushes, feeling how every word from my son was another stab in the back. I, who had worked 16-hour days for decades, to build the medical empire that Charles now directed, reduced to the old nurse who was in the way of his business plans. Do you know what the most painful part of all this is? It's not just the disrespect. It's realizing that I failed as a father, completely. I remembered that morning in February 1984, when Charles was born at the public hospital. I was 34, and had just secured my position as a surgeon at Benito Juarez Hospital, when I held him in my arms for the first time. That 7-pound baby. I promised him he would have everything I never had during my childhood on the South Side. And I kept that promise. Boy, did I keep it. I worked double shifts for years to pay for his education at the Latin school, where the tuition cost more than my entire monthly salary. On weekends, when my colleagues were resting with their families, I was performing private surgeries to earn extra money. Diane sewed medical scrubs at home to help with the bills, her fingers bleeding some nights from the needles, but she never complained. I vividly remember the day Charles graduated from medical school, back in 2006. I was in the front row of the auditorium theater, in my best suit, with a smile so wide it barely fit on my face, shouting his name when he went up to get his diploma. "That's my son," I told everyone sitting near me. "He's going to be the best cardiologist in America." During his residency at Northwestern Memorial, I mentored him every night. We reviewed cases. We practiced surgical techniques on models I bought with my own money. I taught him every secret I had learned in my first 20 years of practice. "Medicine is a calling, son," I always told him. "Our hands are here to save lives, not to get rich." The biggest mistake of my life was the day I handed him the directorship of the first clinic. It was March 2010. I was 60. Charles had just turned 26, fresh out of his specialty training. I called him into my office at the Chicago Heart Center, the clinic I built brick by brick with loans that took me 10 years to pay off. I put the keys in his hand and told him, "This is the fruit of 30 years of my work, Charles. Protect the Miller family legacy." He hugged me that day. He told me he was proud of me, that he would follow in my footsteps, that he would always maintain the tradition of medical excellence combined with human warmth. That defined our clinics. "I'll be worthy of your trust, Dad." Those were his exact words, and I believed him, like you believe your own son. The first few years everything seemed fine. Charles modernized the equipment. He hired young specialists. He expanded our services. By 2015, we had opened the second clinic in Lake Forest, and by 2020, the third one down in Miami. The business was growing. I continued to operate in the mornings, and Charles handled the administration. It seemed like the perfect combination. But something changed after the pandemic. Charles began to talk differently about the patients, especially those who came in on Medicaid or with no resources. "Dad, we have to be more selective," he told me. "We can't keep subsidizing free treatments if we want to maintain our competitiveness in the private market." I explained to him that we had always reserved 30% of our consultations for charity cases, that it was our social responsibility. He would just nod. But I could see something had changed in his eyes. The change became more obvious when Diane started to get sick. The first symptoms appeared in 2022. Small memory lapses, confusion about dates, difficulty remembering the names of people she had known for decades. The Alzheimer's diagnosis came like a hammer blow in March of 2023. I cut my patient load in half so I could care for her. And Charles did not like that at all. "Dad, hiring professional nurses would be more efficient." He suggested several times. "You could maintain your surgical productivity, and Mom would receive specialized care." But I couldn't delegate the care of my Diane to strangers. She had dedicated 40 years of her life to caring for Charles and me. She had sacrificed her own dreams to support ours. It was my turn to take care of her. The last 6 months were the hardest. Diane no longer recognized me most days. She would call me doctor and ask when her husband was coming home. Sometimes she would have moments of lucidity where she knew me. She would take my hand and say, "Raymond, what is happening to me? I'm scared." Those moments broke my soul, but they also gave me the strength to keep caring for her. Charles practically disappeared during those months. At first he came on Sundays, but then the visits became less frequent. The last 10 weeks before Diane died, I didn't see him at the house once. When I asked him why he wasn't visiting his mother, he answered with a coldness that I now recognize as his true nature. "Dad, she doesn't even know who I am anymore. It's painful for everyone, especially for Patricia and the kids." I continued to take Diane to the garden every day, reading her the Robert Frost poems she loved so much in her youth, playing the Frank Sinatra songs we used to dance to at the October fairs. Even if she didn't react, I knew that somewhere deep inside her, my Diane was still there, waiting. She died on a Tuesday morning, peacefully, while I held her hand. Her last words were, "Raymond, take care of our boy." She meant Charles, of course. Even in her final moments, she was thinking of our son. And now I'm here, in this bed that feels too large without her, replaying every moment of that horrible funeral. Seeing with absolute clarity that the boy Diane asked me to care for has become a heartless stranger, capable of humiliating his own father in the most painful moment of his life. It's 5 in the morning now, and for the first time in 2 years I'm not crying for Diane, I'm thinking, planning, feeling something I haven't felt in a long time, the certainty that it is time to act. If Charles thinks I'm a burden, if he thinks the clinics are already his, if he considers his old father an obstacle to his business plans, then it's time to show him what it really means to lose the respect of the man who gave you life. Tomorrow, I'm going to make some calls. I'm going to review some documents. I'm going to teach my son a lesson I should have taught him many years ago. That respect is earned, but it can also be lost forever. And when you lose the respect of a father who gave you everything, my friend, you lose much more than that. If you're listening, pray for my Diane. But don't pray for me. I have work to do. At 7 in the morning, I got out of that empty bed with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I put on my gray suit, the same one Charles considered inappropriate the day before. I poured myself a strong black coffee, just like my father taught me, and I headed to the Lake Forest Medical Center on Michigan Avenue, that clinic, the largest of the 3, where I officially hold 60% of the shares, even if my son believes it's already completely his. The morning traffic in Chicago gave me time to think as I drove my 2018 Honda Civic. Yes, my friend. At 74, I still drive the same car I bought when I retired from the public hospital, while Charles drives around in his brand new BMW, paid for with the profits from my clinics. Every red light was a reminder of all the signals I had ignored about my son's true nature. I arrived at the clinic and greeted Grace, the receptionist I've known since we opened this place in 2015. "Good morning, Dr. Miller. You're in early today." I told her I had important matters to resolve, and I asked her to immediately call Robert Morris, our chief accountant, and Michael Ortiz, my trusted lawyer. "Tell them it's urgent, Grace. Have them here before 9. I sat in my office, surrounded by all the diplomas and awards hanging on the walls. 40 years of my medical career stared back at me from those golden frames. The Illinois Medical Merit Medal, the recognition from the American Heart Association, photographs with governors and mayors whose hearts I repaired with these hands, hands that now tremble a little with age, but are still precise with a scalpel. Robert arrived first. With that worried look he gets when he knows something is wrong with the numbers. He's been handling our clinic's finances for 15 years. Ever since he was a young accountant, fresh out of the University of Chicago. He's an honest man, one of the few left, and he has always been loyal to me. "Robert, I need you to show me all the financial statements from the last 3 years. Everything, no exceptions." I told him, cutting right to the chase. "I want to see every invoice, every transfer, every movement of money that Charles authorized in my absence." His face grew even more serious. "Dr. Miller, is there something specific you're worried about? Because I have to tell you, I've noticed some irregularities in recent months. But Mr. Charles told me you were aware, and that they were part of a new business strategy." There it was, the first confirmation. Michael Ortiz arrived 10 minutes later with his leather briefcase and that experienced lawyer's attitude that inspires confidence. Michael and I have known each other since college. We were party buddies back in the 72nds, and he's one of the few people I trust completely with legal matters. "Michael, Robert, what we are about to review must not leave this office." I warned them. I suspect my son has been making significant financial decisions without my knowledge, and I need to know exactly what he's been doing. For the next 4 hours, the 3 of us dove into an ocean of documents, invoices, bank transfers, and digital correspondence. What we found turned my stomach more than any complicated surgery I've ever performed. Robert showed me the invoices from the last 18 months. "Look, doctor, here you have Mrs. Martinez, the wife of the supermarket chain owner. She came in for a routine angioplasty. The real cost of the procedure is $8,000, but it's invoiced here for $15,000. He turned the page, and here, Mr. Rodriguez, bypass operation, real cost, $20,000. Invoiced, $32,000. The list was endless. Patients with private medical insurance or high incomes, all systematically overbilled. The numbers danced in front of my eyes like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "And where's this extra money going?" I asked, although I already imagined the answer. Michael was reviewing the bank statements with his lawyer's focus. There's a special account that Charles opened last year, supposedly for extraordinary administrative expenses. All the extra money from these overbillings is being deposited there. But the worst was yet to come. Robert opened a thicker folder, full of receipts and records of medical equipment usage. Doctor, I also found this. On weekends, when the clinics are officially closed, Charles has been performing private surgeries using our equipment. But the money isn't entering the clinic's official accounting. He showed me specific dates, Saturdays and Sundays, where records showed use of the operating room, consumption of medical supplies, but no registered income. These are operations he charges for directly, in cash, without issuing an invoice, without reporting the income. We calculate it's about $50,000 a year that he pockets, undeclared. If you're listening, my friend, tell me if you've ever felt that the son you raised is actually a stranger living in your house. Because that's exactly what I was feeling, as I reviewed every document that proved Charles's systematic dishonesty. Michael found what completely shattered my heart. On Charles's personal computer, which he used to access the admin system, there was a folder called USA Expansion Project. Inside were emails with a medical corporation in Texas called Medicorp Raymond. You have to see this, Michael said in a grave voice. He read it aloud. Dear Mr. Miller, we confirm our interest in acquiring the 3 cardiovascular clinics in Chicago for the sum of $15 million. As agreed in our October meeting, your personal commission for facilitating the sale will be $2 million deposited into the Panama account you provided. The date on the email was November 5th, just 10 days before Diane's funeral. My son had been negotiating the sale of our medical legacy while I was caring for his dying mother. But there was more. We found WhatsApp messages between Charles and Patricia, his wife, that broke my soul. In one dated November 8th, 3 days before Diane died, Charles wrote, "The old man is completely obsessed with taking care of Mom. He doesn't see the reality of the business. He's too attached to his sentimental medicine for the poor. When I have full control, this is going to become a real profitable business, not a charity." Patricia replied, "It's about time, love. Your dad is a good person, but he doesn't understand that times have changed. Modern hospitals are businesses, not charity temples." I just sat there reading those messages over and over, feeling how each word was a deeper betrayal than the last. Sentimental medicine for the poor. That's what my son called the philosophy it took me 40 years to build. The belief that a doctor has a moral obligation to help those who cannot pay. Robert kept reviewing documents and found something else. "Doctor, there are records of meetings with American investors here. Charles has been promising them that they will completely eliminate care for low-income patients. He says it will increase profitability by 40% annually." At that moment, my friend, I had one of those flashbacks that hits you like lightning. I was transported back to August 2005. Charles was 21, in his 5th year of medical school. I had invited him to observe a particularly complex surgery, an 8-year-old boy with a severe congenital heart defect. The family was humble. They sold tamales in Lincoln Park, and they didn't have a single dollar to pay for the operation. I remember that day vividly because after the surgery, Charles and I sat in the hospital cafeteria, and he asked me, "Dad, why did you operate on that boy for free? The private hospital would have paid you $20,000 for that same surgery." I explained to him what my own father had taught me when I was a boy on the South Side. "Son, when God gives you the gift to heal, you have an obligation to use it to help everyone, not just those who can pay you. That boy has the same right to live as the son of any rich businessman." Charles nodded that day. He told me he understood, that he respected my philosophy. "I'm going to be like you, Dad. I'm going to put human life before money." I felt so proud, so full of hope for the future of our name in medicine. And now, 20 years later, I was discovering that the same young man who promised to follow my footsteps had been planning to completely eliminate free care from our clinics. Worse, he had been stealing money from wealthy patients to finance his lavish lifestyle, while coldly calculating how to sell my life's work to foreign investors. Michael kept reviewing emails and found correspondence with hospital administrators in Houston and Dallas. Charles had been exploring job offers in the U.S. conditioned on him completing the sale of the Chicago clinics. In one email, he told a Dr. Anderson, "My father is from the old school, too emotional to understand that modern medicine is a business. But that's going to change soon." "How long have you been noticing these irregularities, Robert?" I asked my trusted accountant. "About a year, Dr. Miller. At first I thought they were mistakes. But then I saw it was a systematic pattern. I wanted to talk to you several times. But Mr. Charles told me you were very busy taking care of your wife, and that he didn't want to bother you with administrative details. Just one more manipulation. Charles had used Diane's illness to keep me away from important financial decisions, telling all the employees that I was too distracted to handle the business. By 2 in the afternoon we had finished reviewing all the documents. The picture was clear. My son had been systematically stealing for the last 2 years, overbilling patients, using our equipment for undeclared operations, and planning to sell our family legacy to American investors who would turn our clinics into soulless money factories. "Michael, what are my legal options?" I asked my lawyer as we organized all the evidence into separate folders. "Many, Raymond. Charles is technically an employee of the clinics, not the owner. You maintain controlling shares. You can fire him immediately for mismanagement. You can press criminal charges for fraud. And you can report him to the Illinois Medical Board to have his license suspended," Robert added. "Also, Doctor, all this overbilling can be considered tax fraud. The IRS would be very interested in reviewing these undeclared accounts." I sat in silence for several minutes, processing all the options. 40 years building an impeccable medical reputation, and my own son had been staining it with his dirty maneuvers. The irony was cruel. I, who had sacrificed personal profits for decades to keep our clinics as accessible healing centers, discovered that my heir had been turning my legacy into the exact opposite of everything I stood for. "There's something else you need to know, Raymond," Michael said in a serious voice. "I found documents suggesting that Charles has been telling other hospital directors that you're having mental health issues related to grief, that you're making irrational decisions, and that he is protecting the clinics from your emotional choices." There it was, the complete strategy. First, he isolated me from administrative decisions using Diane's illness as an excuse. Then, he started planting doubts about my mental stability among my colleagues. The next step would have been to declare me incompetent and take total control of the clinics, to complete the sale to the Americans. If you're listening, my friend, you'll understand why I felt estranged. Almost supernatural. Calm at that moment. There was no more pain or disappointment. There was only absolute clarity about what I had to do. My son had coldly calculated every move to destroy everything I had built, to use my reputation to get rich, and then to discard me as if I were a nuisance. But he had made one fundamental mistake. He underestimated the old doctor who taught him everything he knew about medicine, and who, obviously, had taught him nothing about honor and decency. "Michael, Robert, I want you to prepare all this documentation formally. We are going to act quickly, before Charles suspects we've discovered his plans." I explained my strategy. First, public confrontation and immediate dismissal. Second, a formal report to the medical board. Third, a tax fraud complaint. And fourth, something I hadn't told them yet but was already forming in my mind. I was going to use this betrayal as the perfect opportunity to create the true legacy I wanted to leave, one that would honor Diane's memory and the values that truly matter. Charles had wanted to play the role of the disloyal son manipulating his old sentimental father. Now, he was about to find out that this old man still had a few cards left to play, and that when a father decides to defend his honor and his legacy, he can be far more relentless than any unscrupulous businessman. The war had begun, but my son didn't know yet that he had already lost. After Michael and Robert left, I stayed alone in my office, surrounded by all those diplomas and awards hanging on the walls, silent witnesses to 4 decades of work. The Illinois Medical Merit Medal stared at me from its golden frame, and for the first time in years, I wondered if all the sacrifice had really been worth it, not for me, but for the man my son had become. I poured a coffee from the thermos I always keep on my desk, and I sat in my leather chair. The one I bought used in 1995 when we opened the first clinic. My eyes fell on the photograph of Diane I keep next to the computer, taken on our 20th wedding anniversary in Miami. There she is, in her white cotton dress, and that smile that lit up any room, holding a bouquet of purple bougainvilleas we cut from the hotel garden. If you're listening, my friend, I'm going to tell you what it really means to build a medical legacy when you come from nothing, when your only capital is the desire to save lives. And the woman who believes in you even when everything seems impossible. It was 1985. Charles had just turned 1. I was 35. I had just secured my position as a cardiovascular surgeon at Benito Juarez Hospital. My monthly salary was about $2,500, which back then was enough to live modestly, but not enough to dream big. Diane and I lived in a small 2-bedroom rented house in a working-class neighborhood, where the sound of the L train woke us up at 5 every morning. But I had a dream that burned inside me like a fever, to open my own cardiovascular clinic, a place where I could combine medical excellence with affordable prices for the working people of Chicago. "You're crazy, Raymond," my colleagues at the hospital told me. "Doctors like us don't open private clinics. That's for doctors with family money." Diane never told me I was crazy. On the contrary, when I told her my dream one Sunday night, she took my hands and said, "If you believe you can do it, I believe in you. We'll find a way." And we found a way. But the price was incredibly high. I started working double shifts, 6 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon at the public hospital, and 5 in the afternoon until midnight seeing private patients in rented offices. Diane would get up at 4 in the morning to make my breakfast and lunch. Then she would take Charles to her mother's and go to work sewing medical scrubs for a company that paid her by the piece. I vividly remember her hands back then, always covered in small wounds from the needles, her fingers swollen from so much sewing. Some nights I'd find her at the dining table at 11, still working under the light of a second-hand lamp, finishing scrubs to deliver the next day. "Every scrub I sew is one more brick for your clinic," she'd tell me when I begged her to rest. Weekends were sacred for earning extra money, while my colleagues went to Lake Geneva with their families, or rested at home watching the Bears game. I was operating on private patients at St. Mary's Hospital. I charged much less than the established surgeons, but my reputation for surgical precision spread quickly among middle-class families who needed quality heart surgery without paying exorbitant prices. By 1990, we had managed to save $80,000, a fortune for us back then, but it wasn't enough to open a full clinic. We needed at least $200,000 for the basic equipment, the rent, the permits, the initial staff. That's when I made the riskiest decision of my life: to mortgage our small house, which we had only bought 2 years earlier. The day I went to the bank to apply for the $200,000 loan, I was wearing my only formal suit, and all the documents proving my income as a surgeon. The manager, an older man with a gray mustache, looked at me skeptically. "Dr. Miller, you have a stable salary at the public hospital. Why risk your home for such an uncertain business?" I explained my vision: a cardiovascular clinic that combined technology with fair prices, where middle-class patients could receive the same level of care as the rich, and where we would reserve 30% of consultations for charity cases. The manager finally approved the loan, but with one condition that still gives me chills. If I failed to pay on time for 3 consecutive months, the bank would take the house. Diane signed those papers without trembling, although I knew she was just as scared as I was. "If we lose the house, we'll find another one," she told me that night. "But if you don't chase your dream, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The next 3 years were the hardest of our marriage. All our extra money went straight to the bank. A $1,500 monthly payment that represented more than a third of our combined income. We lived on the bare minimum, buying the cheapest cuts of meat at the market, wearing the same clothes until they fell apart, walking instead of taking the bus to save the dollar fare. Charles, who was 7 at the time, would sometimes ask why we couldn't go to Disney World like his classmates, or why he didn't have a new bike like the other kids. I explained to him that we were building something special, that one day he would understand these sacrifices were worth it. "When you grow up, son, You're going to have a clinic where you can help save many lives. In 1992, we finally bought the clinic's first CT scanner, a used but functional machine that cost exactly $80,000. The day it was installed, Diane and I hugged in the empty hallway of what would become the Chicago Heart Center, crying with joy and relief, because we could finally see our dream taking physical form. The clinic officially opened in March 1993. I was 43. I had lost almost all my hair from the stress of those building years. But I held in my hands the fruit of 8 years of non-stop work. The first few months were exciting but terrifying. Some days we had 10 patients, other days none. Diane became the clinic's unofficial administrator. She arrived every morning at 7 to organize appointments, handle payments, coordinate with labs, and make sure everything ran perfectly. I didn't pay her a formal salary because we couldn't afford it, but her work was more valuable than any employee I could have hired. By 1995, we were seeing an average of 50 patients a week and had built a solid reputation in Chicago as the clinic for quality, accessible cardiovascular care. We religiously kept our promise to reserve 30% of our consultations for low-income patients, something that filled me with satisfaction every time I saw a humble family leave the clinic, knowing their loved one would receive the best possible treatment. Charles grew up seeing all this. During his high school years, he'd come to the clinic after class to do his homework in my office, observing how the business worked, how we treated patients, how we handled difficult cases. I thought he was learning values, that he was absorbing the philosophy of service I had built with so much effort. In 2005, when Charles finished medical school, I was at the peak of my professional satisfaction. We had the most respected cardiology clinic in Chicago. We had paid off all the loans. We had bought our own house in Lake Forest, and my son was following in my footsteps. Everything worked out just as we planned, my love. I told Diane on Charles's graduation day. But life, my friend, has cruel ways of reminding you that nothing stays the same forever. The first symptoms appeared in October 2018, when Diane was 68. We had gone to the big public market, where she had bought vegetables and spices since we were married. She knew that market better than her own home. She knew exactly where to find the best tomatoes, the freshest chiles, the most tender meat. That day, she came out of Mr. Aurelio's butcher shop, where we'd been customers for 30 years, and she just stood in the middle of the main aisle, looking around with a confused expression. "Raymond, where are we? I don't recognize this place." I took her hand and guided her to the exit, telling her it was the same market we had come to thousands of times. She looked at me with frightened eyes and said, "I don't remember being here before." Neither of us slept that night. Diane was distressed, and I was terrified, because I had seen enough cases in my practice to suspect what was coming. The next day I took her to the most respected neurologist in Chicago, Dr. Hernandez at the public hospital. The test took 2 weeks. MRI, blood work, cognitive tests. When Dr. Hernandez called us in for the results, I already knew what he was going to say. Early. Stage Alzheimer's. Inevitable progression. Prognosis of 5 to 7 years of gradual decline until death. Diane received the news with the dignity that always defined her. "How much time do we have, doctor?" she asked calmly. When he explained the disease's process, she took my hand and said, "Then we have to make the most of every moment while I am still me." And we made the most of every moment, my friend. For the first 2 years, while Diane could still function, we traveled to all the places we had always wanted to see, but had postponed because of work. Miami, where we renewed our vows on the same beach where we spent our honeymoon. Santa Fe, where we bought crafts and ate food we'd never tasted before. Savannah, where we walked through the colonial streets, hand in hand, like newlyweds. But the disease is relentless. By 2021, Diane began to have more frequent episodes of confusion. She would get lost in our own house. She couldn't remember how to use some appliances. Sometimes she wouldn't recognize our neighbors. I reduced my patient load at the clinics, from full time to part time, and then to consultations only 3 days a week. Charles didn't understand, or didn't want to. Dad, you can hire specialized nurses. He told me every time I explained why I needed to be home more. Mom will receive better professional care, and you can maintain your productivity at the clinics. Productivity. That word hurt every time I heard it leave his mouth. Charles, this isn't about productivity, I explained patiently. This is about your mother taking care of me for 40 years while I built my career. Now it's my turn to take care of her. He would nod, but I saw in his eyes that he truly didn't understand the concept of gratitude. The most difficult months began in March 2023. Diane had reached the stage where she no longer recognized me most of the time. She called me doctor and asked me when her husband was coming home from work. Doctor, my Raymond should be here by now. It's 7. He always comes home at 6. I would answer her calmly. Your husband is on his way, Mrs. Miller. In the meantime, I'll stay with you. Some nights she had moments of lucidity. She would take my hand with that surprising strength and say, Raymond, my love, what's happening to me? I'm so scared. I feel like I'm disappearing. Those moments broke my heart, but they also gave me the strength to continue. I established a sacred routine. Every morning at 6, after bathing her and giving her the oatmeal with honey she loved, I would sit her in the garden, under the shade of the oak tree we planted when Charles turned 10. I would read her poems by Robert Frost, especially The Road Not Taken. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Even if she didn't react, even if she looked at me with empty eyes, I knew that somewhere deep inside, my Diane was still there, listening. On Sundays, we played music. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, the songs we danced to when we were young. Sometimes she would instinctively move her feet to the rhythm of Fly Me to the Moon, and I would take her in my arms to dance slowly in the living room, as we had done thousands of times. Charles practically disappeared during those final months. At first, he came on Sundays after church. He would sit with his mother for 10 minutes. But it was obvious he felt uncomfortable when she didn't recognize him. It's too painful to see her like this, Dad, he explained. It's traumatic for Patricia and the kids, too. The visits became more and more spaced out, from weekly to every 2 weeks, then once a month, and finally, the last 10 weeks before Diane died. I didn't see him at the house once. When I asked why he had stopped coming, he answered, Dad, she doesn't even know who I am. It's painful for everyone. Why subject them to that? I continued my daily routine, without fail. 6 in the morning, bath, breakfast, garden, poems, noon, lunch, nap, music, 6 in the evening, dinner, television, bed. It was exhausting. But it was also the most important work I had ever done. One afternoon in September, Diane looked me directly in the eyes and said with a clear voice, Raymond, thank you for not abandoning me. I know I don't always recognize you, but I feel your love every single day. My voice broke. I couldn't read anymore. I just held her, and we cried together, knowing it was probably one of our last moments of true connection. She died in October 2024, on a Tuesday at 4 in the morning, peacefully, while I held her right hand and sang an old lullaby, the one I used to sing to her when she couldn't sleep. Her last words were, Raymond, take care of our boy. She meant Charles, of course. Even in her last moments, she was thinking of our son. If you're listening, my friend, now you understand. You understand why Charles's behavior at the funeral hurt me so deeply. It wasn't just disrespect towards me. It was the final confirmation that I had raised a man incapable of the basic love a child should have for his parents, a man who found it traumatic to visit his sick mother, who thought my grief was embarrassing. As I sat there in my office, surrounded by diplomas, I realized I had failed in the most important way. I had failed to teach my son that professional success without compassion is worthless, that money without dignity is a curse, that family is not a business to be sold to the highest bidder. Diane had died asking me to take care of our boy, but our boy had become a stranger, coldly calculating how to get rid of his father, to steal his inheritance. It was time to teach him a lesson that would honor the memory of the woman who sacrificed her whole life for our family. and who died believing her son had a heart. It was time to show him what it truly meant to lose a father's love. On November 15th, 2024, exactly 1 week after Diane's funeral, I sent an urgent message to all doctors and administrative staff of our 3 clinics. Extraordinary meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the conference room of the Chicago Heart Center. Attendance is mandatory. Subject: important decisions regarding the future of our medical institutions. Dr. Raymond Miller, founder and majority shareholder. That night, I didn't sleep, but not from grief like the nights before. It was anticipation of what I was about to do. Michael Ortiz had prepared all the legal documents. Robert Morris had the financial evidence ready, and I had coordinated with Dr. Evelyn Reed from the Illinois State Medical Commission to be present as an official witness. At 9 a.m., I arrived at the Heart Center, the 4-story building on Michigan Avenue we built with so much pride in 2015. Grace, the receptionist, greeted me with that motherly smile that always calms me. "Good morning, Dr. Miller. Everyone is arriving for the meeting." I thanked her and went up to the 2nd floor, to the large conference room that holds 80 people. If you're listening, my friend, imagine the irony. Me, the founder of these clinics, feeling butterflies in my stomach as if it were my first day of work, while I prepared to fire the son I had raised to be my successor. By 10 o'clock, 68 people were present. All the specialists, head nurses, administrators, lead technicians. Dr. Reed sat discreetly in the back row. With her official briefcase from the medical commission, Michael and Robert took strategic seats near the main table. Charles arrived 5 minutes late, as he always did to mark his importance. Dressed in his Italian navy blue suit, and that confident smile he wore to all administrative meetings. He greeted several colleagues with a pat on the shoulder, joked with Dr. Mendoza about the Bears game, and walked naturally toward the black leather president's chair that he had occupied for the last 5 years. "Good morning, colleagues," he said, settling into the chair, opening his laptop and taking out a leather notebook. "Dad, what's this extraordinary meeting about? You didn't mention anything yesterday." He looked at me with that slightly annoyed expression he used when he thought I was acting without consulting him, as if he were the one who had to authorize my decisions. In my own clinics, I was standing by the window, holding a thick folder with all the documents we had compiled. The silence in the room was expectant, but relaxed. Everyone thought it was a routine year-end meeting, maybe to discuss Christmas bonuses or expansion plans. "Charles, please get up from that chair," I said in a calm but firm voice. "You no longer belong there." His smile froze. "Excuse me? Dad, what are you talking about?" He looked around the room, seeking support from the confused faces of our employees. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's no joke." I opened the folder and took out the first document. "Colleagues, I have convened you this morning to inform you of a decision that, as founder and majority shareholder of these clinics, I have had to make after discovering serious irregularities in our administration." The atmosphere changed instantly. Doctors sat up straight, the murmuring stopped completely, and Charles turned as pale as if he had seen a ghost. Today, November 15th, 2024, I am firing Charles Miller from the position of CEO for gross violation of medical ethics, abuse of trust towards our patients, and fraudulent financial maneuvers that have stained the reputation of our institutions. If you have ever heard the sound of absolute silence, my friend, that is what filled the room. 8 people holding their breath, while Charles gripped the arms of his presidential chair as if he were sinking. "Dad, what are you doing?" he murmured, his voice breaking. "You can't, not in front of everyone. I can. And I am." I held up the first set of papers. In the last 2 years, Charles Miller has systematically overbilled private insurance patients, misappropriating $48,700. That should have remained in the corporate accounts. I read the specific names, the exact dates, the precise amounts. Mrs. Martinez, overbilled by $7,000 for a routine angioplasty. Mr. Rodriguez, an extra $12,000 on a bypass. Dr. Mendoza put her hand to her mouth when I mentioned Mr. Rodriguez. Herrera, whose family had to borrow money to pay for an operation. That cost $4,000 less than what Charles had charged them. Furthermore, I continued, feeling my voice grow firmer with each revelation, for the last 18 months, the now former director has used our operating rooms and medical equipment to perform 127 undeclared private surgeries, pocketing all the fees, without reporting this income to the official accounting. Charles tried to stand, but his legs didn't seem to respond. Dad, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain. There is nothing to explain. I pulled out the second set of documents, the printed emails that had shattered my heart. But there is more, much more. Robert Morris went up and connected a laptop to the projector. On the big screen, the emails between Charles and Medicorp Texas appeared, with dates, amounts, and specific terms of the sale agreement. Charles Miller. I said his name with the same coldness he had used when he called me. The old man has been secretly negotiating the sale of our 3 clinics to an American corporation for $15 million, with a personal commission of $2 million, to be deposited in a bank account in Panama. Murmurs of shock filled the room. Several doctors stood up incredulous. Dr. Herrera, who had worked with us for 15 years, shouted, "Charles, how could you do this without consulting anyone?" "But wait," I said, raising my hand for silence. "Here comes the part that hurts me most, as a father and a doctor." On the screen, the WhatsApp message Charles had sent to his wife appeared. I read it aloud, word for word. "The old man is too attached to his sentimental medicine for the poor. When I have full control, this is going to become a real, profitable business, not a charity." The silence that followed was so thick, you could cut it with a scalpel. Several of our young doctors, the ones I had personally taught, looked at me with tears in their eyes. Charles finally found his voice, but it was a trembling thread. "Dad, you don't understand modern business. Hospitals have changed. Medicine has evolved." "I understand business," I interrupted him, with a firmness that surprised even me. "What I understand perfectly is betrayal." I walked closer to him. He was still clinging to that presidential chair, as if it were the only thing separating him from the abyss. Betrayal of the patients who trusted us. Betrayal of the employees who work honestly in these clinics. Betrayal of your mother, who died believing we had raised a man of honor. And betrayal of me, I added, feeling 40 years of paternal love turn into absolute disappointment. Me, who worked 16 two-hour days for decades to build something you could be proud of, not something you could sell to the highest bidder. Charles tried one last, desperate defense. The American doctors. They offered us cutting, edge technology, international expansion. I was going to create jobs. By eliminating free care for the poor, I shouted, losing my composure for the first time, by turning my life's work into a soulless money factory? That isn't progress, Charles. That is medical prostitution. Dr. Reed discreetly approached and handed me the official documents. Dr. Miller, as a representative of the Illinois State Medical Commission. "I have witnessed these revelations. Based on the evidence presented, we will proceed immediately with the suspension of Dr. Charles Miller's medical license for a period of 3 years, subject to review and possible extension." Charles finally collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. "My career, my reputation. Dad, you can't do this." "I already did," I replied with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "Dr. Reed, here are all the financial documents, the correspondence with the American corporation, and the evidence of unauthorized use of medical equipment. Michael Ortiz, my lawyer, will accompany you through the entire legal process." I then addressed the entire staff. "Colleagues, I want to apologize on behalf of the Miller family for this shameful situation. I want to assure you that all of your jobs are secure, that the benefits for low-income patients will not only be maintained, they will be expanded, and that these clinics will continue to operate with the same ethical principles on which they were founded." The applause that followed was spontaneous and prolonged. Several doctors came up to shake my hand, expressing their support and their relief. That the humanitarian traditions of our clinics would continue. Charles left the room, walking like a sleepwalker. followed by the official representatives who would process his case. He didn't look at me once, but I didn't try to catch his eye either. That man. He was no longer my son. He was just someone who had worked in my clinics and had violated the trust placed in him. That same afternoon, I started making the calls that would finish destroying Charles's professional reputation. I called Dr. Martinez, president of the American Cardiology Association, and told him not only about the financial irregularities, but about how Charles had publicly humiliated me at Diane's funeral. "Rodrigo," I said on the phone, "you need to know that Charles Miller is capable of pushing his own father away from his wife's casket because he thinks a 15-year-old suit isn't appropriate for his social image." The story spread through the medical circle like oil on water. By Wednesday, Dr. Fernandez from Miami had called to express his outrage. By Thursday, Dr. Lopez from St. Mary's told me she had withdrawn the recommendation she had given for Charles to be considered for the head of her cardiology department. By Friday of that week, every private hospital director in Chicago, Miami, and Lake Forest knew that Charles Miller was not only a dishonest administrator, but a heartless son, capable of humiliating the father who had given him everything. If you're listening, my friend, you'll understand. It wasn't revenge that motivated me. It was pure and simple justice. Diane had died asking me to take care of our boy, but our boy had shown that he was incapable of the most basic respect. Sometimes the only way to teach honor is to show the consequences of total dishonor. The following Monday, I received a call from the most exclusive private clinic in Chicago. "Dr. Miller, we wanted to inform you that Charles Miller applied for a job as administrative director, but after consulting with our colleagues, we have decided not to consider his application." By the end of the month, Charles had applied for work at 23 different medical institutions. From every single one, he received the same response: "Thank you for your interest, but we do not have any openings for your professional profile at this time." Private medicine in Illinois has a long memory, and nobody wanted to associate their reputation with someone who had betrayed both his patients and his own family. The last I heard of him, through third parties, he had found a job as a nurse's aide in a rural clinic in Indiana, earning $2,500 a month, 18 times less than the $45,000 a month he was earning as director of my clinics. His wife Patricia filed for divorce 3 weeks after his firing, citing incompatibility of life goals, and took the BMW, the family savings, and custody of the children, according to the prenuptial agreement they had signed. Justice, my friend, sometimes arrives late, but when it arrives, it is complete. In December 2024, exactly 1 month after firing Charles, I made the most important decision of my professional life. I sold the 3 clinics I had built over 30 years, but not to just anyone, my friend. I sold them to the State of Illinois Public Health Fund for $18 million, with very specific conditions. That would honor everything Diane and I had dreamed of. Mr. Harris, the director of the fund, came to my office to sign the contract. I explained my non-negotiable conditions. "Mr. Harris, this $18 million comes with sacred responsibilities. First, all 127 employees will keep their jobs with the same salaries. Second, 30% of all consultations and surgeries will be completely free for low-income patients. And third, my wife Diane Miller's name will appear on the honor plaque of each clinic." The official accepted immediately. "Dr. Miller, it is an honor to receive these facilities under these conditions. The state of Illinois recognizes your generosity and your social vision." But the real project was just beginning. That same afternoon, I sat down with Michael Ortiz in his office, and I told him about the plan. That had been forming in my mind since the day of Diane's funeral. "Michael, I want to create something completely new, a network of totally free clinics in the poorest neighborhoods in the country. I'm going to use the $18 million from the sale, plus another $8 million I have saved, in a fund that Charles never knew existed." Michael took off his glasses and looked at me with curiosity. "Another $8 million? Raymond, in all these years as your lawyer, you never mentioned those resources." "Because it wasn't necessary, my friend. Since 1995, I have been secretly setting aside 10% of all clinic profits in a separate investment account. It was my insurance for old age, my guaranteed inheritance for Charles, but now that money is going to serve a much worthier purpose. I explained my full vision: to create the Diane Miller Medical Foundation, to establish free clinics on the south side of Chicago, in Detroit, in the suburbs of Mississippi, in the marginalized neighborhoods of Appalachia, places where people die of curable diseases, simply because they don't have money to pay a doctor. The first clinic will be called the Diane Miller Medical Center on the south side. I said, with an emotion I hadn't felt in years, "Do you know why there, Michael? Because that's the neighborhood where Diane and I grew up in the 52nds, when we were so poor that some nights we only had bread and butter for dinner. If you're listening, my friend, I'll tell you what the South Side was like when Diane and I were kids. It was 1955. I was 5. She was 6. Our families lived in brick tenements. That turned into ovens in the August heat and freezers during the January frost. My father, God rest his soul, worked loading sacks at the market for $5 a day when there was work. Diane's mother washed other people's clothes, her hands raw from the harsh soap. Back then, when someone in the neighborhood got sick, you had 2 options: get better on your own, or die. There was no money for doctors or medicine. I vividly remember when little Carmen died, the daughter of our next-door neighbors. She was 8 years old, and had a throat infection that any doctor could have cured with penicillin. But the penicillin cost $10, and her father didn't even have $2 for the bus fare to the medical center. Little Carmen died on a Tuesday morning, choking, while her parents cried, powerless. I was 9 years old when I saw her in her little white coffin, and I swore to myself that one day I would become a doctor, so that no child would ever die for lack of money. 60 years later, I returned to that same neighborhood to fulfill that childhood promise. On January 15th, 2025, we bought the land on the corner of Independence and Morelos, right across from the elementary school where Diane and I learned to read. It was an empty lot. That cost $800,000, which we immediately converted into the most important construction of my life. The clinic was designed to see 200 patients daily, completely free. 4 general practice offices, 2 pediatric, 1 gynecological, a minor surgery room, a full lab, a basic pharmacy, and an air-conditioned waiting room, where people could wait comfortably. I hired 12 young doctors, all committed to my philosophy of medicine for the people, not for profit. I paid them competitive salaries, better than in many private hospitals, but with one condition: not a single dollar in extra fees, everything free, always. Dr. Elena Morales, a 30, year. Old internal medicine specialist, was the first to join. Dr. Miller, my whole life I've wanted to work, in a place where I could help, without worrying about costs. This is a dream come true. Dr. Javier Hernandez, a 28-year, old pediatrician, told me something that stuck with me. Doctor, my grandmother died because she couldn't afford an EKG that cost $300. If I can prevent that from happening to one more grandmother, my career will have been worth it. The Southside Clinic officially opened on March 15th, 2025, exactly on the anniversary of when we opened the first heart center in 1993. But what a difference, my friend. In 1993, I was nervous, because we needed to charge money to survive. In 2025, I was thrilled, because we could finally give, without expecting anything in return. The first patient was Mrs. Maria Sanchez, 73 years old, a diabetic, untreated for 5 years. Because she couldn't afford the monthly control visits, she walked in with a cane, expecting to be charged at least $200 for the consultation, when we told her everything was completely free. The consultation, the blood tests, the medication, the monthly follow-up. She broke down crying right there in the office. "Doctor, are you serious? You're not charging me anything? Not even for the pills?" Her granddaughter was crying too, hugging the grandmother who had resigned herself to dying. because it was too expensive to live. The first month we treated 700 patients. The second month, 1,200. By May, we had a 3-week waiting list, but no one left without care. We extended our hours until 10 p.m. and opened 24-hour emergency consultations on weekends. But one clinic was not enough. In April, we opened the second one in Detroit, in a neighborhood where people live day to day. In May, we established the third clinic, in a rural town in Mississippi, home to families of agricultural workers, who earn maybe $100 a day during harvest season, and nothing the rest of the year. The fourth opened in June in Appalachia, in a part of West Virginia, where families live in trailers, and gastrointestinal infections kill children, who could be saved with a $5 oral serum. By July, we had the fifth clinic running in the suburbs of Tijuana, serving migrant families. The statistics at the end of that first year filled me with a satisfaction I had never felt, not even when we opened the private clinics. 3,000 patients treated monthly, 26,000 free consultations in the first 12 months, 600 minor surgeries performed at no cost, 140 children fully vaccinated, 83 diabetics successfully controlled. But above all, I had created something that Charles would never have understood, a medical system where success was measured in lives saved, not in dollars earned. While I was building this medical legacy in Diane's honor, my son was facing the consequences of his decisions. Michael kept me discreetly informed about Charles's situation. Raymond, Charles has applied for jobs at 23 different private clinics. Since his dismissal, Michael reported in June. In all of them, he was told they have no vacancies. The reality is, his reputation is completely destroyed. The news caused me neither satisfaction nor pain. It was simply the natural consequence of his actions. When you betray patients' trust and humiliate your father in public, the medical world, which is small and has a long memory, does not forget easily. In August, I learned that Patricia had filed for divorce, citing incompatibility of life goals and a drastic change in the family's economic situation. She took the BMW, the savings, and got custody of their 2 children. According to the prenuptial agreement, Charles ended up working as a nurse's aide in a rural clinic, earning $2,500 a month, from $45,000 a month as director of my clinics to $2,500 cleaning medical instruments and changing bedpans, a 94% reduction in income. Life, my friend, has very precise ways of teaching humility to those who believed they were more important than they really were. During those months, I also took care of formalizing my inheritance. I called Michael one afternoon in September to draft my new will, one that reflected my true priorities. "Michael, I want Charles to be completely excluded from any inheritance," I said, without doubt or hesitation. "I want the document to state exactly this. Charles Miller is excluded from all inheritance for having publicly dishonored the memory of his mother, Diane Miller, and for lacking the minimum human dignity. That should characterize a son." The lawyer took notes carefully. "And the destination of your personal assets, Raymond? Your house, your remaining savings. It all goes to the Diane Miller Medical Foundation. The house is to be sold, and the money invested in more free clinics. My personal savings, my investments, everything is converted into medicine for the poor. I want that when I die. Every dollar I leave continues to save the lives of people who cannot pay." In October, I also changed my life insurance policy, designating the foundation as the sole beneficiary, $2 million. That, upon my death, would immediately become resources to expand the network of free clinics. One afternoon in November, while reviewing the monthly reports from the 5 clinics, I had a moment of absolute clarity about what I had accomplished in that transformative year. The numbers spoke for themselves. 5,000 free consultations performed, 800 minor surgeries completed at no cost, 1,200 children vaccinated, 300 diabetics successfully controlled. But behind each number was a real human story. like little Peter Morales, a 6-year-old boy with a congenital heart defect, whom we operated on for free in March, and who now runs and plays soccer like any normal kid. His parents, who sell tamales on the corner, could never have afforded the $200,000 that surgery costs. Or like the story of Mrs. Carmen Ruiz, a 55-year-old woman, whom we diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. During a free routine check, pied up, we operated at no cost. We gave her all the necessary chemotherapy, and by December she was completely cured. In a commercial medical system, Mrs. Carmen would have died, because she didn't have $500,000 for her treatment. Every story was a confirmation that I had made the right decisions, that the money Charles wanted to use to buy a bigger house and fancier cars was being invested in something infinitely more valuable, human life. The final encounter with my son happened by chance one Saturday in December, on the street, right in front of the old bookstore where Diane and I used to buy books. I was leaving after signing a contract to open the 6th free clinic, this time in Cleveland, Ohio. When I saw him walking towards me, he was thinner. His clothes were no longer expensive brands. He walked with his shoulders slumped, like someone who has lost all self-confidence. For a moment, I thought maybe he would approach me to apologize, to acknowledge his mistakes, to try to repair the damage he had caused. He stopped about 15 feet away from me. He looked me directly in the eyes and opened his mouth as if he were about to say something. For a second, the briefest of seconds, I saw something in his face that looked like vulnerability, maybe even regret, but I kept walking. I passed right by him, as if he were just another stranger in the Saturday afternoon crowd, without a word, without a gesture of recognition, not out of cruelty, but because, quite simply, there was nothing left to say. The man who had humiliated Diane's memory and betrayed 40 years of paternal trust had stopped being my son. The day he pushed me away from my wife's casket, that night, sitting in my house on Columbus Street, which now feels less empty because it is filled with purpose, I reflected on everything that had changed. In that extraordinary year, at 74 years old, I had discovered that it is possible to completely reinvent the meaning of one's own life. If you're listening, my friend, you will understand that there is no deeper satisfaction than knowing your work will continue to save lives, long after you are gone. Every dollar that Charles would have spent on unnecessary luxuries is becoming a surgery that restores hope, medicine that calms pain, consultations that detect diseases in time. Diane's memory no longer lives only in my private memories. It lives in the gratitude of thousands of families who have found medical hope where there was none. It lives in the smile of every child who leaves our free clinics cured. It lives in the tears of relief of every mother who discovers that, yes, there is a place where they can treat her child without asking for money she doesn't have. I am 74 years old, and for the first time since Diane died, I sleep in peace. Not because I have forgotten the pain of losing the love of my life, but because I have found the perfect way to honor her memory, by turning the money our son wanted to steal into medicine for those who need it most. Justice has been restored, my dignity has been defended, and the legacy I am going to leave is destined for people who truly deserve it and value it. Sometimes, my friend, life gives you a second chance to do things truly right. I got mine at 74 years old, and I took it completely.